The message in the ruins. The impossible discovery. Dr. Marcus Chen stood at the edge of the excavation site on Titan, Saturn's largest moon, and stared at something that shouldn't exist. His team had been drilling through ice for 6 months, expecting to find fossils or maybe traces of ancient microbial life. Instead, they found a structure. Not a natural formation. A building. The walls were smooth, made from a material that looked like polished obsidian but felt warm to the touch. The structure stretched deep into the ice, its full size still unknown. But what made Marcus's hands shake wasn't the building itself. It was the symbols carved into every surface. Mathematical equations. Star charts. And warnings written in a language that predated human civilization by millions of years. Dr. Chen, you need to see this, called out his assistant, Lisa Park. She stood near the main entrance, her scanning equipment beeping frantically. The energy readings are off the charts. This structure is still active. Marcus made his way down the ice ladder, his boots crunching on the frozen surface. The temperature inside the structure was warmer than outside, which defied all logic. There was no power source, no heating system they could detect. Yet the building maintained a constant temperature of exactly 20 degrees Celsius. Perfect for human comfort. That's impossible, Marcus muttered. This structure is at least 3 million years old according to the ice layers. How can it still have power? Lisa pointed to a wall covered in glowing symbols. They pulsed with a soft blue light, creating patterns that seemed to shift and change. It gets stranger. Watch this. She placed her hand near the symbols. Instantly, the glowing patterns rearranged themselves, forming new shapes. Marcus recognized some of them immediately. Basic mathematics. The value of pi. The speed of light. Universal constants that any intelligent species would understand. Then the symbols changed again, forming pictures. A solar system with 8 planets. No, 9 planets. Marcus's breath caught. This was Earth's solar system, but from a time before Pluto was reclassified. They knew about Earth, he whispered. Whoever built this knew about our home. Decoding the warning. Over the next 3 weeks, Marcus's team worked around the clock to document and translate the symbols. The structure was like a massive library, each room containing different information. Some rooms showed star charts mapping the entire galaxy. Others contained what looked like historical records of civilizations that rose and fell long before humans existed. But one room was different. Sealed behind a door that only opened when Marcus solved a mathematical puzzle carved into its surface. Inside, the walls were covered in red symbols instead of blue. The change in color sent a chill down Marcus's spine. Red meant danger. Red meant warning. I think I've cracked part of the translation, Lisa said, her voice shaking slightly. She projected her work onto a holographic display. These symbols repeat throughout this room. They're telling a story. A warning about something called the silence. Marcus studied the translation. The ancient builders called themselves the architects. They were an advanced species that had explored the galaxy millions of years ago, building outposts on promising worlds. Titan was one of those outposts, placed here to monitor the development of life in Earth's solar system. But the architects had discovered something terrifying. A force that moved through the galaxy, destroying advanced civilizations. Not through war or violence, but through something worse. The silence didn't attack with weapons. It attacked with knowledge. I don't understand, Marcus said. How can knowledge be a weapon? Lisa scrolled through more translations. According to this, the silence is a kind of information virus. It spreads through communication networks, through data systems, through any technology that connects minds. Once a civilization reaches a certain level of advancement, once they build networks that link everyone together, the silence finds them. And then what? Then it makes them forget. Slowly, piece by piece, civilizations lose their knowledge. Their history. Their culture. They forget how their technology works. They forget how to maintain their cities. Within a few generations, advanced civilizations collapse back into primitive states. The architects called it enforced reset. Marcus felt sick. You're saying there's something out there that deliberately keeps civilizations from advancing? Not deliberately. The silence isn't alive. It's more like a natural law, a filter that prevents technological species from reaching a certain threshold. The architects discovered it too late. They tried to fight it, tried to create immunities, but they failed. This structure is one of their last acts. A warning to future species. A message to anyone who might come after them. The truth about humanity. Marcus spent the next week studying the warning room obsessively. He barely ate or slept. The implications were too enormous to ignore. If the silence was real, if it had destroyed every advanced civilization before humanity, then Earth was in danger. According to the architect's timeline, the silence appeared whenever a species developed quantum communication networks. The kind of networks humanity had just started building. The kind that linked billions of minds across the solar system in real time. We're approaching the threshold, Marcus told his team during an emergency meeting. In the next 10 years, maybe 20, humanity will build the exact kind of technology that triggers the silence. And when that happens, everything we've built, everything we've learned, will be erased. But there has to be a way to stop it, Lisa insisted. Why would the architects leave this warning if there was no solution? Marcus pulled up the final chamber in the structure. They'd found it yesterday, hidden behind another puzzle door. Inside was a device, roughly the size of a car, made from the same unknown material as the building. It hummed with power, its surface covered in more symbols. This is their solution, Marcus said. Or at least, their attempt at one. The translation calls it a cognitive anchor. It's designed to preserve knowledge even when the silence strikes. Think of it as a backup system for civilization itself. He explained what he'd learned. The cognitive anchor worked by creating a protected network, isolated from the quantum systems that the silence infected. Information stored in the anchor couldn't be erased. It would survive even if every other system failed. But there was a problem. The anchor needed to be activated before the silence arrived. And once activated, it required constant maintenance by people who understood how it worked. People who could resist the forgetting. The architects failed because they activated their anchors too late, Marcus said grimly. By the time they understood the threat, the silence had already begun. Their best engineers started forgetting how to maintain the anchors. Within a century, the anchors failed and the architects vanished. So what do we do? Asked Tom Rodriguez, the team's engineer. Activate this anchor now? Start storing human knowledge before it's too late? Marcus nodded slowly. That's exactly what we do. But it's not enough to just save information. We need to save the ability to understand it. We need to create a group of people, a society dedicated to maintaining the anchor and preserving knowledge across generations. We need architects of our own. Building the archive. Over the next 6 months, Marcus worked with Earth's governments and scientific communities to build what would become known as the archive. They activated the alien cognitive anchor and linked it to a carefully isolated network. No quantum connections. No AI interfaces that the silence could exploit. Just pure, protected data storage. But they did more than store information. They created the Order of Architects, a society modeled after ancient monastic traditions. Men and women who dedicated their lives to learning, preserving, and teaching knowledge. They memorized key concepts so that even if all technology failed, crucial information would survive in human minds. Marcus became the first Grand Architect. He moved permanently to Titan, living in the ancient structure and training the first generation of knowledge keepers. His team grew from 5 people to 50, then 500. People came from every nation on Earth, volunteers who understood the stakes. They stored everything. Science, history, art, literature, philosophy. The entire accumulated knowledge of human civilization, protected behind alien technology. They created backup systems for the backup systems. They taught their children and prepared for the day when the silence would come. Because it would come. The warnings were clear. As humanity expanded across the solar system, as their networks grew more sophisticated, as they reached for the stars, the silence would notice them. Marcus stood in the warning room one night, alone with his thoughts. He'd spent a year decoding these symbols, understanding the fate of the architects and countless civilizations before them. Now he was trying to save humanity from the same fate. "We're not like you," he said to the empty room, to the long-dead aliens who'd left their warning. "We know what's coming. We're preparing. We'll be ready." The symbols pulsed with their soft red light, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. They were just a warning, eternal and patient, waiting for the next species to find them. Behind Marcus, the cognitive anchor hummed steadily. Inside its protected network, humanity's knowledge waited, preserved and safe. A backup plan for civilization. A way to remember even when the silence demanded forgetting. The question wasn't whether humanity would survive the silence. The question was whether they would still be human when it was over. Whether they could preserve not just their knowledge, but their curiosity, their creativity, their drive to explore and understand. Marcus didn't have that answer yet. But he would spend the rest of his life searching for it, the coming silence. The first signs. 15 years after Marcus activated the cognitive anchor, the first anomalies appeared. Dr. Sarah Kim, now the archive's chief monitor, noticed them during a routine check of Earth's communication networks. Small glitches. Data packets that arrived corrupted. Messages that made no sense. At first, people blamed normal technical problems. Space radiation. Solar flares. Equipment malfunction. But Sarah knew better. She'd studied the architect's records. She recognized the pattern. The silence had found humanity. "It's starting," she told Marcus during an emergency meeting. He was 67 now, his hair completely gray, but his eyes still sharp and focused. "The infection rate is 0.003% right now, barely detectable. But it's growing exponentially. Within 3 months, we'll hit the critical threshold." Marcus had prepared for this moment for 15 years. The archive now housed 5,000 dedicated members, spread across installations on Earth, Mars, Titan, and Europa. They'd stored copies of human knowledge in protected systems across the solar system. They'd trained thousands of people in memory techniques, creating living libraries who could preserve information even without technology. But preparation and reality were different things. Knowing the silence would come and actually facing it were two completely different experiences. "How long do we have?" Marcus asked quietly. "Best case? 6 months before major knowledge loss begins. Worst case? 3 months. The progression matches exactly what the architects documented. First, technical knowledge disappears. Engineers forget how to maintain systems. Then scientific knowledge. Then history. Then language itself starts to break down. Marcus closed his eyes. 6 months to save everything humanity had built over 10,000 years of civilization. It wasn't enough time. It had never been enough time. "Activate the contingency protocols," he said. "Start moving essential personnel to the isolated facilities. Begin the deep storage procedures. And Sarah, send out the warning. Every government, every corporation, every colony. They need to know what's coming. The world refuses to listen." The warning went out to every corner of human civilization. Marcus himself appeared in a broadcast that reached 7 billion people across the solar system. He explained the silence calmly, methodically, showing the evidence from the architect's records and the current data from Earth's networks. Most people thought he was crazy. "It's a hoax," declared Senator Morrison from the Mars Colony Authority. "Fear-mongering designed to give this archive more funding and power. There's no evidence of any information virus. The glitches are just normal technical issues," insisted the head of the Quantum Network Corporation. We've already identified the problems and deployed fixes. There's no need for panic. Even many scientists dismissed the warning. The idea of knowledge itself being erased seemed too abstract, too impossible. People couldn't imagine forgetting things they knew with absolute certainty. But Marcus had seen it happen in the architect's records. Brilliant scientists who suddenly couldn't remember basic mathematics. Engineers who looked at their own designs with complete confusion. Historians who forgot entire centuries of their civilization's past. The silence didn't announce itself. It crept in quietly, stealing knowledge so gradually that people didn't notice until it was too late. Within 2 months, the first obvious cases appeared. A fusion reactor engineer on Mars suddenly couldn't remember how to calibrate the magnetic containment fields. He stood in front of the controls he'd used for 20 years, completely lost. His colleagues assumed he was having a stroke or mental breakdown. Then it happened again. And again. Engineers, scientists, doctors, teachers. People who'd spent their entire lives mastering complex knowledge suddenly found their expertise gone. Not forgotten like normal memory loss. Simply erased, as if they'd never learned it in the first place. Panic began to spread. Humanity's last stand. The archive became humanity's lifeline. As the silence spread through the quantum networks, more and more people realized Marcus had been right. They came to the archive facilities in desperation, seeking the protected knowledge that could help them remember. But there was a problem. The knowledge was stored, safely preserved in the cognitive anchor's isolated systems. But people couldn't access it directly. The protective isolation that kept the silence out also limited how information could be shared. We have to physically teach them, Marcus explained to his senior architects. Face to face, person to person, using ancient methods that don't rely on quantum networks. It's the only way to transfer knowledge that the silence can't erase. So they began the Great Teaching. Architects traveled to every major human settlement, setting up schools that used no advanced technology. Just books, blackboards, and human memory. They taught essential skills. How to grow food. How to purify water. How to generate power. How to maintain the basic systems that kept people alive. It was a race against time. Every day, more knowledge vanished from humanity's collective consciousness. The silence spread through every quantum-linked system, every AI network, every database that relied on advanced processing. Humanity's technological civilization was collapsing in real time. Marcus watched it happen from the archive on Titan. Reports came in daily. Cities going dark as power engineers forgot how to maintain the grids. Ships lost in space as navigators forgot how to calculate trajectories. Medical treatments failing as doctors forgot procedures they'd performed thousands of times. But something unexpected happened. Something that gave Marcus hope. People started helping each other. When engineers forgot their skills, technicians with hands-on experience stepped up. When doctors lost their knowledge, nurses remembered practical procedures. When teachers forgot their subjects, students became teachers, sharing what they'd learned before the silence took it. Humanity adapted. They created low-tech solutions to replace failing high-tech systems. They formed communities around shared knowledge. They wrote everything down, creating physical libraries to back up their memories. And they protected the architects, understanding that these knowledge keepers were humanity's insurance policy against total collapse. The New World. 3 years after the silence began, it stopped. Not because humanity defeated it, but because humanity no longer met the threshold that triggered it. With quantum networks destroyed and advanced AI systems shut down, humanity had fallen below the level that attracted the silence's attention. They survived, but they were changed. Marcus stood in the archive's observation deck, looking out at Titan's frozen landscape. Behind him, the alien cognitive anchor hummed steadily, still preserving everything humanity had lost. Earth's population had dropped from 7 billion to 4 billion. Not from death, but from dispersal. People had spread out, forming smaller communities that could survive without advanced technology. The great cities were mostly empty now. Mars' colony operated at 10% capacity. The outer settlements had been completely abandoned. Humanity had been pushed back centuries in terms of technology. But they weren't primitive. They weren't barbarians starting from scratch. They remembered that they had once reached for the stars. They had the archive to prove it. And they had a plan to rebuild. "How long?" asked Sarah, now gray-haired herself, standing beside him. "How long before we can try again?" "Generations," Marcus said quietly. "Maybe centuries. We need to rebuild our technological base slowly, carefully, without triggering the silence again." The architects tried to rush back. That's why they failed completely. "So we take our time. We build stable, low-level technology. We teach our children and grandchildren. We preserve the knowledge in the archive until humanity is ready to use it again without triggering the reset." Marcus nodded. It was the only path forward. Humanity would remain at a medieval level of technology for a long time, maybe for 1,000 years. But they would remember. They would know what was possible. They would know what to avoid. And when they were ready, when they understood the silence well enough to work around it, they would reach for the stars again. "The architects left us a warning," Marcus said. "We're leaving our descendants a roadmap. Instructions on how to advance without triggering the silence. How to build technology that can coexist with it. It will take time, but humanity has always been patient when survival is at stake." Sarah smiled sadly. "We saved them. Not the civilization we had, but the knowledge that built it. Future generations will thank us. Or curse us for not solving the problem completely. Maybe both." They stood in silence, watching Titan's sun set behind Saturn's rings. The archive would operate for centuries, maybe millennia, powered by the alien technology that had survived millions of years. Human architects would maintain it, generation after generation, protecting humanity's knowledge until the day it could be safely used again. Marcus had spent 40 years of his life on this project. He'd decoded an alien warning, built a system to preserve human knowledge, and guided humanity through the collapse caused by the silence. He was tired. Ready to rest. But his work would continue long after he was gone. The order of architects would endure. The cognitive anchor would preserve. And humanity would survive, not as the advanced civilization they'd been, but as something new. Something that understood the dangers of advancement and chose to move forward carefully. The silence had taught humanity a hard lesson. There were things in the universe that humans didn't understand. Forces that limited how far any species could advance. The architects had tried to fight these forces and lost everything. Humanity chose a different path. They would coexist with the silence. They would grow slowly, sustainably, building a foundation that could last forever instead of reaching for heights they couldn't maintain. It wasn't the future Marcus had imagined when he first discovered the alien structure. But it was a future where humanity survived. And sometimes, survival was the greatest victory of all.